Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Tristan Goodbody, Senior Forest Carbon Geospatial Scientist at Carbon Direct. Tristan, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for showing interest in our work.
Of course, yeah. So to get started, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and Carbon Direct and what you do there?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Tristan Goodbody. Like you said, I'm a senior forest carbon geospatial scientist at Carbon Direct, and I live in a small town on Vancouver Island in Canada. My background is I have a PhD from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, which was focused on mapping forest resources using remote sensing data. And I'm super fortunate to work at Carbon Direct. This company is really at the forefront of evaluating how remote sensing data can be used to improve forest carbon project quality. And that's really what drew me to work with them in the first place.
Great. Thank you for that background info. So, there was a recent announcement about an engagement with Meta. Could you tell us about that, what it's all about, and what the result was?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe I'll take a step back first and kind of describe that most of the work that I do at Carbon Direct involves analyzing forest carbon projects. So that could mean afforestation projects or improved forest management activities as examples. And this means that my colleagues and I assess whether the science behind estimates of how much carbon is being removed from the atmosphere are as accurate as possible. And a challenge is that these projects can be very large, located in remote and often difficult to access areas, which makes measuring carbon complex and expensive. And this is really where Carbon Direct's collaboration with Meta comes in. We Both of these companies, view remote sensing and remote sensing workflows as opportunities to improve the scientific rigor of measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verifying carbon stocks through time. And this really manifested in the release of two different reports. The first describes how remote sensing is currently used in forest carbon projects. And we had a bunch of stakeholder interviews where we spoke to people to identify what the barriers are to using remote sensing data and to its adoption. And then we also propose recommendations for reaching that high quality bar. And then the second report, it highlights Meta's globally available canopy height model dataset, which provides estimates of vegetation height for the entire planet, which is super cool. And in this report, we highlight how this dataset fits into current forest carbon project methodologies, and then also provide use cases for its adoption.
Perfect. Okay. So, for just an overview, what are forest carbon projects and why do they matter?
Yeah, I think I described it a little bit in the last question. These projects can be afforestation or improved forest management or restoration. These are activities that are taking place somewhere where we're modifying common practice to be able to generate carbon credits through forest management. And fundamentally, these carbon projects are tools and market mechanisms that can help realize climate action goals. They matter because institutions and individuals around the world are searching for projects that they can invest into that can verifiably remove carbon from the atmosphere. That verifiably part is very important. So carbon removal is important, but then at the same time, they want those projects to be benefiting local communities and their environments. So these forest carbon projects are unique because they help us to meet climate action goals and then also act as mechanisms to finance social development and promote biodiversity conservation. So that's a trifecta: economic, social, and environmental impact. And Carbon Direct recognizes this and really views remote sensing data and analyses as having major potential to benefit these projects. And that it comes across in two ways. Using remote sensing data can mean that we can more accurately estimate and monitor changes to carbon stocks through time, which consequently leads to the number of credits that are being generated, bought, sold, and retired are more defensible and conservative and more accurate. So I guess to answer your question at the bottom line, integrating high quality remote sensing approaches can help buyers be more confident that their climate investments in these projects are contributing to real impact.
Okay. Um, so to expand on remote sensing a bit, why do you think it's becoming so central to carbon credit quality?
Yeah, so the cool thing I think is that many of us use remote sensing data subconsciously almost daily, but they might not be thinking about it. You know, we probably each have opened up our Maps app on our phone today and seen satellite imagery, and that's remote sensing data. You know, there are tons of satellites in orbit right now that are collecting data about our planet that can help us make decisions about how we manage our resources, whether that's forest management or agriculture, for an example. And these data sets, or remote sensing in general, is not just collected from satellites, but we can collect remote sensing data from airplanes or drones or sensors on the ground or your cell phone. I guess to give a concrete analogy or example, I live in Canada, and there's a lot of forest in Canada, and a lot of it is very remote. We benefit enormously from remote sensing data and analytical tools because they help us answer questions about our forests, like how they're changing through time, where forest fires have been, which is constantly in the news, or how much carbon our forests are potentially storing. And in order for us to be able to get those insights, it would be incredibly challenging or and expensive or just impossible without using remote sensing data. So using that same example of Canadian forests, if we just replace that with a carbon project somewhere in the world, it highlights that remote sensing data and the workflows that are applied to them can help us more accurately measure potential carbon stocks, monitor and estimate those changes through time, report those estimates, and then verify those. So the more that we can standardize and make our approaches more accurate, the more trust buyers can have that their investments are contributing to meaningful climate impact.
Okay. So when it comes to acquiring that data, what are the biggest barriers that you see to getting high quality remote sensing in measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification?
Yeah, so this was a major part of our collaboration with Meta. We had the privilege of interviewing over 40 different forest carbon project stakeholders. So this means that we got to speak to project developers who are building these projects, the registries who define rules around their creation, and data providers who are creating remote sensing data sets for use in projects today. And in these conversations, we identified three main barrier themes. The first of which was governance and methodological improvement. There, it was obvious that there needs to be more clarity around what best practices and high quality looks like, particularly around key themes like estimating uncertainty and how that might relate to project quality. The second theme that we identified, or the second barrier theme that we identified, was remote sensing data constraints. There is an increasing number of proprietary data sets that are being made specifically for estimating and monitoring forest carbon stocks, but there are many project developers, maybe who have economies of scale challenges or are too small, that they can't access that data because it's too expensive to implement at scale. So that's something that we need to address, which is kind of an equitability challenge. And the third theme that we identified was knowledge and infrastructure gaps. So most stakeholders are not remote sensing scientists, and I can definitely appreciate that. And they need more support from domain experts like my colleagues at Carbon Direct and at Meta to break down complex topics and really simplify the process of using remote sensing data and getting the most out of it to achieve high quality projects.
So, how do we move past the barriers that you just mentioned? And to tag on that second one you brought up, how can remote sensing be adopted by project developers to improve forest carbon projects?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll touch on how they use them first, and then we can speak about the recommendations that we present in our reports. I
Okay.
think there's three ways where project developers can use remote sensing data. The first is really project planning and feasibility. Where could a project be located? How logistically challenging would it be? Answering those types of questions from an analysis perspective. The second would be project area eligibility assessment. There's many forest carbon methodologies that require projects to assess historical land use, which, whether that could be like whether deforestation is happening or whether forest is converted into pasture land, for an example. Those are pieces of information or insights that we can derive from remote sensing data sets. And then the third, and really what I found most interesting, is monitoring project performance. So many remote sensing data sets, like the Landsat time series, for example, which is a famous one, collect data through time. And this means that they can be used to help estimate initial carbon stocks, like when a project starts or even before a project starts, and then detect and quantify changes to project areas, like if a forest fire happens through time. So those are the three areas where we see remote sensing having some sort of application. If we're moving into the recommendations for how we want, what we propose essentially in our report, I think this is something that I get fairly excited about. And the fact that we're putting forward these recommendations with Meta really highlights how we're pushing actionable climate science. And the finding, I guess, that we present in the reports is that this is a team effort. We spoke to a lot of different stakeholders, and all of them, including credit buyers, have some sort of role to play in addressing the barriers that we've identified. And I'm just going to plug our design team that there's a beautiful table in the report where our recommendations are broken down really nicely and linked with the barrier themes that we discussed earlier in this call. We present 7 recommendations. I'll list 3 for you. The first was that domain experts and registries need to be involved in defining clear guidelines around data and model use. So, we need to get to the bottom of important questions like, how should we be estimating and reporting uncertainty in carbon stocks? Or how should we standardize approaches for different project types and locations? That's super important for us to be able to address, and everyone in the industry needs to be involved in that. The second would be improving equitable access to remote sensing data and analyses. We consistently heard from stakeholders that creation of a data portal to help developers access data and produce standard analyses would be valuable. Like I said, not everyone is a remote sensing scientist, and some of these things can be very complex. So having some sort of centralized repository or platform that could be used to help project developers and registries use remote sensing data would be excellent. And then the third, which is something I haven't brought up yet, but I'm also quite passionate about, is there is an AI boom happening right now, and it is fantastic from a remote sensing perspective because there's so much potential. There's so much remote sensing data out there, and we need to continue to leverage progress and innovation to develop better and better models that use these remote sensing data, and that will really help to produce more reliable, trustworthy, and verifiable estimates of carbon across project areas.
Great. Again, we are talking to Tristan Goodbody, Senior Forest Carbon Geospatial Scientist at Carbon Direct. Tristan, thank you again for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we close out?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and showing interest in our work. It's been a lot of fun to talk with you. I guess maybe what I'll say is, I've been using remote sensing data and analyzing it for a long time, and I really do feel that Carbon Direct is at the forefront of evaluating how these data and tools can be used to improve project quality. I think that our reports really reflect that, and they really show that we're trying to promote actionable carbon science. And another major benefit of them is that they're beautiful to look at. So I really encourage your listeners to go and take a look. I speak for all my colleagues in saying that it was such a pleasure to collaborate with Meta on this, and I'm really looking forward to what the future brings. So thanks again for the conversation.
Yes, thanks, Tristan. And thank you to our listeners. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please reach out. For more podcasts like this one, visit carboncapturemagazine.com and subscribe for industry news. We hope that you enjoyed this podcast and look forward to next time. Until then.